One introduction. Dept view the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. Dept view purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to residents against wood smoke emission particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents against wood smoke emission particulates, or ROSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this ROSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57 DHWT June 19, 2025 Williamsburg, Virginia. Enslaved black children were educated here. 1 Headlines 2 Assassination of Democrat Minnesota State Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband. Opinion The problem of the Christian assassin. 3 Juneteenth Civil Rights Enslaved children learned at this school on Juneteenth. This Williamsburg Schoolhouse finds a new life for Madison on science. Trump travel restrictions bar residents needed at U.S. hospitals. 5 Trump Actions NATO Trying to satisfy Trump. NATO is running into difficulties. 6 Trump budget cuts health and life. Gun control week and Justice Department to cut gun sale inspectors by 2/3 as it moves to downsize ATF. 7 Trump budget cuts. Social Security benefits could be cut in 8 years unless Congress acts. 8 Assassination of Democrat Minnesota State Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband. Ex-posts of Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. The ex-posts of a U.S. Senator after the Minnesota shootings were horrific and predictable. 9 Juneteenth Civil Rights Democrats No Kings demonstrations sizes in 2025 compared to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. March on Washington in 1963 were the No Kings protests the largest single-day demonstration in American history. 10 Wisconsin Trump budget cuts on research in areas including medicine and science. The University of Wisconsin at Madison. The real costs of research funding cuts. Main content. 1A Headlines The New York Times June 19, 2025 2 Assassination of Democrat Minnesota State Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband. Opinion The problem of the Christian assassin. The New York Times Belgian nonprofit Pappy Boom is helping retirement home residents hit the clubs. The New York Times Climate Change U.S. heat wave forecast when high temperatures will affect you. The New York Times Democrats New York mom Donnie narrows the Cuomo lead in NYC mayor race. New poll finds. The New York Times Democrats New York The Donnie comment on intifada motto fuels tension in race for mayor. The New York Times Democrats opinion a progressive future depends on national identity. The New York Times Democrats New York opinion the Cuomo candidacy is a symptom of a bigger democratic problem. The New York Times France history in Paris. A new app explores the French Revolution. The New York Times human interest. Dan Storp, founder of Putumayo world music label, dies at 74. The New York Times human interest. They asked ChatGPT questions, the answers sent them spiraling. The New York Times Iowa Trump Actions. A Trump executive order could affect Ukrainian refugees in Iowa. The New York Times 3 Juneteenth Civil Rights Enslaved children learned at this school on Juneteenth. This Williamsburg Schoolhouse finds a new life. The New York Times LGBTQ rights. Trump administration will end the Trevor Project work with National Suicide Hotline. The New York Times Medicine and Science an illustrated guide to inflammation in the body. The New York Times for Medicine and Science. Trump travel restrictions bar residents needed at U.S. hospitals. The New York Times Medicine and Science. This new slang term is inaccurate and trivializes the negative effects of smoking cigarettes. Cigarette smoking directly causes lung cancer. High sugar intake is not as directly linked to cancer as cigarette smoking is linked to cancer. What is a fridge cigarette? A new term for Diet Coke gains traction. The New York Times Medicine and Science. Trump National Institute of Health cuts. Trump NIH cuts disputed in lawsuits by Democrats are what this judge is fast-tracking to trial. William G. Young, a Reagan-appointed judge, is fast-tracking Trump to trial. The New York Times Russia. China is hacking Russia to steal war secrets. The New York Times Russia. No Sting no Mercedes. A Russian expo shows cost of divorce with the West. The New York Times 5 Trump Actions NATO Trying to satisfy Trump. NATO is running into difficulties. The New York Times 6 Trump budget cuts health and life. Gun control week on Justice Department to cut gun sale inspectors by 2/3 as it moves to downsize ATF. The New York Times 7 Trump budget cuts. Social Security benefits could be cut in 8 years unless Congress acts. The New York Times Trump tariffs. How the Trump trade war has whipsawed the port of Los Angeles. The New York Times 1B Headlines The Guardian June 19, 2025 8 Assassination of Democrat Minnesota State Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband. Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. The ex-posts of a U.S. Senator after the Minnesota shootings were horrific and predictable. The Guardian Democrats. The anti-Trump camp was in disarray. How has No Kings managed to unite it? The Guardian 9 Juneteenth Civil Rights Democrats No Kings demonstrations sizes in 2025 compared to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. March on Washington in 1963 were the No Kings protests the largest single-day demonstration in American history. U.S. News: The Guardian. Ukraine war briefing: Russia can defend itself, says Putin, as North Korea sends more soldiers Ukraine. The Guardian. 1C headlines: Other June 19, 2025. 10 Wisconsin Trump budget cuts on research in areas including medicine and science. The University of Wisconsin at Madison: the real costs of research funding cuts. UW-Madison. 2 Assassination of Democrat Minnesota State Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband. Opinion: The problem of the Christian assassin edited by RSEP for brevity and clarity, and relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 19, 2025. On Saturday morning, Americans woke up to horrifying news. According to a federal criminal complaint, a man named Vance Bolter had stalked 4 Minnesota lawmakers and then attacked 2 of them: State Senator John Hoffman and State Representative Melissa Hortman, killing Hortman and her husband and wounding Hoffman and his wife. Bolter made lists of Democratic Party officials and abortion rights activists. Right-wing figures online tried to identify him as a Democrat or even a radical leftist, but additional research carried out rapidly dispelled that notion. The roommate of Bolter identified him as a Trump-supporting Republican, and Bolter voted in the 2024 Republican primary. And he was not just a Republican, he was also a 1990 graduate of the Dallas-based Christ for the Nations Institute and engaged in missionary activities in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where he delivered sermons that soon appeared online. Bolter was not just a political assassin, he was a Christian assassin and connected to one of the most radical religious movements in America. Christ for the Nations opened its doors in 1970 and was founded by James Gordon Lindsay of the New Order of the Latter Rain. Elements of Latter Rain are part of a movement called the New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR, which places emphasis on miracles and non-direct revelations from God. The New Apostolic Reformation and its close cousin, the Independent Charismatic Movement, house the most radical Christian Trumpists. They see Trump as divinely destined to save America from the godless left and its political party, the Democrats, who are doing the bidding of Satan here on earth. Americans evangelicals often comparing Trump with other flawed figures from Scripture whom God used to accomplish his purposes, whether it is King David who committed adultery and murder, or King Cyrus the Persian king who allowed the people of Israel to return to Jerusalem after exile. Prophecies around Trump have taken a much darker turn. Jehu prophecy: Jehu is an obscure and vicious ancient king of Israel whose chief claim to fame was overthrowing the house of Ahab, ordering the execution of Queen Jezebel, the wife of the king, killing the sons of King Ahab and piling their heads outside the city gates. A leader named Khan says that God called Jehu to make his nation great again. Khan said Jehu came to the capital city with an agenda to drain the swamp. The vengeance of Jehu becomes the vengeance of Trump. Allusions to the most violent passages of Scripture are common in independent charismatic circles. Last year, in the lobby of Christ for the Nations of a sign stated everyone ought to pray at least one violent prayer each day. A CBS YouGov poll helped the writer of this article understand why Trump is politically resilient and politically vulnerable. A majority of Americans like many of the Trump objectives, but they do not like his methods. Democrats win when they contest the Trump methods, but Democrats lose when they contest at least some of the Trump objectives. This gap between approval for the Trump goals and disapproval of the Trump methods helps explain why he has been elected twice and why his approval sagged so quickly at the beginning of both terms. It also demonstrates why Democrats have not been able to build an enduring majority in spite of the Trump relentless aggression and overreach. If a majority of the American people believe that only the Republican Party shares their objectives, they will keep giving it a chance even when Trump fails, or when Trump is erratic, or when Trump is corrupt. 3 Juneteenth Civil Rights Enslaved children learned at this school on Juneteenth. This Williamsburg schoolhouse finds a new life. Enslaved black children were educated here. Now the public can learn the history beginning on Juneteenth. The restored Virginia schoolhouse where enslaved and free black students were taught to read is on view in colonial Williamsburg. Excerpts edited by RSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 19, 2025. The building with a forgotten past sat on the campus of William and Mary for nearly a century. It served as the home of the military science department at the college in Williamsburg, Virginia, and before that a dormitory for women. But its story is even older. In 2020, researchers discovered that it was not just a facet of the historic campus but a rare artifact in the history of black life in colonial America. About 250 years ago, the unassuming structure housed the Williamsburg Bray School, making it the oldest known building where enslaved and free black children were formally educated. Since the discovery, the Bray School has been fully restored. It will open to the public on Thursday, Juneteenth, in colonial Williamsburg, where it was relocated in 2023 to be preserved. Researchers point to one student, Isaac B., as an example of resilience and resistance. After attending the Bray School, he was moved to another plantation and decided to flee. A runaway ad seeking his return, dated 1774, described B as 18 or 19 years old. The ad noted something else he can read. For medicine and science, Trump travel restrictions bar residents needed at U.S. hospitals. Limits on travel and visa appointments have delayed or prevented foreign doctors from entering the country for jobs set to begin in weeks, except cited by raw except for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 18, 2025. Travel and visa restrictions imposed by the Trump administration threaten patient care at hundreds of hospitals that depend on medical residents recruited from overseas. Foreign medical residents often serve as the frontline caregivers at busy safety net hospitals in low-income communities. Normally the residents begin work on July 1, 2025. Orientation programs for some of them already started this week. Now some of those hospitals are racing to prevent staffing shortages. If international medical graduates cannot start their medical residencies on time on July 1, 2025, the ramifications are far-reaching. Senior residents leave hospitals in June and go on to start their careers. Hospitals rely on the residents to replenish their ranks if they do not come on July 1, 2025. That leaves a hole in the patient care team. This year there were about 40,000 residency positions offered through the national match system, but only 28,000 graduates of U.S. medical schools. An insufficient number of residents in hospitals could cost hospitals Medicare funds tied to graduate medical education. The non-citizen international medical graduates who make it to U.S. training programs are well-trained, well-qualified and motivated. 5. Trump Actions NATO Trying to satisfy Trump. NATO is running into difficulties. A plan to increase military spending at the level Trump wants is becoming clear, as are its shortcomings, except cited by raw except for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 19, 2025. Beyond projecting military strength and pledging unity, a more pressing theme has emerged for the NATO summit next week: keep Trump happy. As leaders prepare to meet for the annual forum starting on Tuesday, U.S. allies have watered down their public support for Ukrainian membership and drafted a policy communique as short as 5 paragraphs to keep the American leader on board. The meeting itself in The Hague will open and close in under 2 days, a timeline designed to keep it devoid of drama. No one wants to say no to Trump, said an analyst for Europe for the Eurasia Group, asked on Wednesday whether the Iran-Israel war would prompt him to skip the meeting. Trump told reporters that he still planned to attend in any case. His influence is certain to loom over the gathering. It has already driven an effort by the Secretary General of NATO Mark Rutte to increase military spending by each of the 32 members of the NATO alliance to meet a figure suggested by Trump. Trump has demanded it be raised to 5% of the gross domestic product (GDP) of each country, up from the current level of 2%. Rutte has proposed widening the definition of military spending to help meet that objective. The new benchmark would include 3.5% of GDP on core defense spending, weapons capabilities and troops, and the rest on what NATO calls defense and security related investment, including in infrastructure and resilience. In the weeks since the Mark Rutte idea gained steam, its details and shortcomings have become clearer. According to officials and experts, the timeline to increase spending may be different for everyone, and officials are confused about the requirements. Even if countries do allocate the sums, European and even American defense industries may not be able to absorb the money or deliver in a timely fashion. And while NATO countries generally agree it is past time to spend more on security in Europe, where officials believe a militarized Russia might be tempted to test the alliance within years, some nations already struggle to reach the existing target on military spending. They are unlikely to meet the Trump demand soon, if ever. Like Rutte, other world leaders have sought ways to get the most out of their dealings with Trump and avoid unpredictable problems. At the Group of Seven summit this week, the newly elected Prime Minister of Canada and host of the event, Mark Carney, deployed a mix of flattery and discipline, yet Trump still disrupted the gathering, departing early to address the Iran-Israel war. Rutte hopes to avoid such an outcome. Trump is making a fake demand for more spending, and they are giving Him a fake response. The analyst said he called the Roots plan clever because it lets Trump get what he wants and he can brag about it. 6 Trump budget cuts health and life. Gun control weaken. Justice Department to cut gun sale inspectors by 2/3 as it moves to downsize ATF. Justice Department to cut 2/3 of inspectors monitoring gun sales. The move is part of the Trump effort to defang and downsize the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives known as ATF. Excerpts edited by Ross Epp for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 18, 2025. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives ATF is considering merging the ATF and the Drug Enforcement Administration. It follows a rollback of Biden-era regulations aimed at stemming the spread of deadly homemade firearms along with other gun control measures. The department plans to eliminate 541 of 800. Investigators determining whether federal dealers are following federal law and regulations intended to keep guns away from traffickers, straw purchasers, criminals and those found to have severe mental illness. The reductions would reduce the ATF capacity to regulate the firearms and explosives industries by approximately 40% in the fiscal year starting in November 2025. The cuts are needed to meet the White House demand that ATF cut nearly 1/3 from its budget of $1.6 billion. The cuts would effectively end the ATF role as a serious regulator of gun sales if the Trump cuts are not reversed by the White House or Congress. These are devastating cuts to law enforcement funding and would undermine the ability of the ATF to keep communities safe from gun violence, said the president of Everytown for Gun Safety, a nonprofit advocacy group. This budget would be a win for unscrupulous gun dealers and a setback for state and local law enforcement partners of ATF. A small percent of the 100,000 or so dealers, collectors and manufacturers monitored by the ATF are inspected in any given year, and some licensees can go nearly a decade without facing routine regulatory scrutiny. The inspections are a target of Republicans as an intrusion into gun rights, but ATF officials, law enforcement groups and gun control activists see routine monitoring as a safeguard against abuses. Some retail outlets are sources for criminals and straw purchasers paid to buy guns. In April, the 10,000 employees of the ATF were handed off from the FBI director to the Army Secretary Daniel Driscoll, who has been told he was being given the assignment a few days before, and Driscoll was not happy with it. 7 Trump budget cuts. Social Security benefits could be cut in 8 years unless Congress acts. Social Security finances erode further and could spell benefit cuts. The key program for retiree benefits in the nation continues to see financing shortfalls unless Congress acts. Those shortfalls could lead to payment cuts in 8 years. Excerpts edited by Ross Epp for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, June 18, 2025. The Social Security program faces a long-standing financing shortfall. The TIF left unaddressed would slash millions of dollars from the crucial monthly benefit payments to retirees in just 8 years. The deteriorating financial outlook for the retirement program, which supports roughly 61 million Americans, was released in its annual trustees report on Wednesday. It is now expected to run out of money 9 months earlier than previously projected, which means benefits could be reduced by 23% if Congress does not act to bolster the program that puts the Social Security Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, which pays retiree and survivor benefits, on schedule to be depleted in 2033 or when the 59-year-olds of today turn 67 in 8 years. At that time, the program will have enough revenue coming in to pay only 77% of total scheduled benefits. The most recent setback was driven largely by a policy change known as the Social Security Fairness Act, which took effect in January and increased benefits for about 2.8 million government and public sector workers. But there were other factors. Government actuaries now assume that the birth rate will remain lower for longer, while projecting that workers' compensation would weaken over time as they capture a lower share of the economic output of America. Older Americans nationwide consistently say that the future of Social Security and Medicare are the issues they care about most, and they stand ready to hold politicians across party lines accountable to strengthen these programs for the long term. 8 Assassination of Democrat Minnesota State Senator Melissa Hortman and her husband. Ex-posts of Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah. The ex-posts of a U.S. Senator Mike Lee of Utah after the Minnesota shootings were horrific and predictable. Michael knows better than to turn tragedy into disinformation, but outrageousness has become the name of the game. Accepted by ROSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, June 19, 2025. On Sunday, Republican Senator Mike Lee went online to share his reaction to the horrible shooting over the weekend of two Minnesota state lawmakers and their spouses. "This is what happens," Lee wrote in a since-removed post on X, "when Marxists do not get their way." Accompanying this ugly, unfounded comment was a photo of the suspect in the shooting, Vance Bolter, wearing what appears to be a latex face mask. As if that was not enough, Mike Lee posted another picture of Bolter under the caption "Nightmare on Waltz Street," an apparent reference to the Minnesota governor and former Democratic nominee for Vice President Tim Walz during the 2024 campaign. Republicans accused him of being soft on crime and mishandling the riots after the murder of George Floyd, so why not suggest that he is somehow to blame for the shootings? Shameful. Lee has dishonored the institution in which he serves, and he knows it. Republican Senate leaders should censure their colleague. If they do not, they will further shred whatever dignity is left in that body. Lee did what his partisan supporters expect him to do: give no quarter, be on the offensive, push your point. These are the rules even when a tragedy occurs. In fact, it increases the opportunity for free publicity that people like Lee crave. But let us be clear, while we can understand the forces that might explain why Lee turned tragedy into disinformation, that does not mean we should accept or forgive him for doing so in the kind of constitutional republic that James Madison imagined. And current U.S. Senator from Utah Mike Lee once praised tragedies like the murders in Minnesota should bring out the best in our leaders. This duty to do their best during a tragedy existed when James Madison wrote about it and remains today to remind us of our shared humanity during national tragedies, and reminds us that actions should not be taken during those times that deepen our political divides. 9 Juneteenth Civil Rights. Democrats No Kings demonstrations sizes in 2025 compared to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. March on Washington in 1963 were the No Kings protests the largest single-day demonstration in American history. Depending on who you ask, between 4 and 6 million people showed up for No Kings, and according to one theory this could be a turning point. ROSEP view ranking by size of demonstration. 20 million people demonstrating for Earth Day in 1970 is first, followed by No Kings at up to 6 million people at the demonstrations on one day. The March on Washington in 1963 drew about 500,000 people, but the impact was large, and the march led by Martin Luther King Jr. could be said to have been a turning point in the civil rights movement. Accepted by ROSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian, June 19, 2025. The scale of the No Kings protests over the weekend is now becoming clearer, with one estimate suggesting that Saturday was among the biggest ever single-day protests in U.S. history. Working out exactly where the protest ranks compared to similar recent events has been a project of a data journalist who runs a Substack. Strength in numbers calculated turnout between 4 million and 6 million, which would be 1.2 to 1.8% of the U.S. population. This could exceed the previous record in recent history, when between 3.3 million and 5.6 million people showed up at the 2017 March of Women to rally against the Trump misogynistic rhetoric. Morris estimated the No Kings Day protest turnout in 2 steps. First, his team gathered data at events for as many locations as possible, defaulting to tallies published in local newspapers where that was not available. They relied on estimates from organizers and attendees themselves. He then estimated the attendance in each unreported protest would be equal to the median of the attendance in places where data did exist. The strength in numbers tally remains unofficial, and he hopes that researchers will build on his data when they conduct more studies, but his estimation is similar to that made by the co-founder of Indivisible, the progressive nonprofit that organized the event. He estimated that 5 million people across the globe took to the streets if 1.8% of the U.S. adult population showed up to protest. It sends a signal to other people that you can stand up to. The 1963 March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, was at the time one of the largest protests in history, with up to 500,000 people in attendance. It was dwarfed in size by the first Earth Day protests in 1970, in which 20 million people helped spark the creation of the Environmental Protection Act. At the time, this was about 10% of the U.S. population. possibly the largest we will ever realistically see. Organizers and attendees of No Kings feel invigorated enough to continue the demonstrations with another round of coordinated protests to fall on 17th of July 17, 2025, the 5-year anniversary of the death of John Lewis, the congressman and civil rights leader. But they admit there are limits to these events. We are not going to win if a lot of people show up at a protest one day. An organizer said we need people actually taking democracy seriously, and that is not going to be done through a top-down action. It has to be done from the bottom up. When pro-democracy movements succeed, it is because of a broad-based, ideological, diverse, geographically dispersed grassroots organizing, not just mobilizing 10 Wisconsin Trump budget cuts on research in areas including medicine and science. The University of Wisconsin at Madison. The real costs of research funding cuts with proposed changes to NIH support critical health research at UW. Madison would be at risk. Here's why. Excerpts edited by ROSEP for brevity and clarity and relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The University of Wisconsin Medicine, May 19, 2025. Research at the University of Wisconsin Medicine drives innovation, saves lives, creates jobs, supports small businesses and fuels the industries that keep America competitive and secure. It makes the U.S. and Wisconsin stronger. Federal funding for research is a high return investment that is worth fighting for. A woman began traveling to the University of Wisconsin Madison campus last year to receive brain scans and blood draws, not as a medical patient but as a research participant. She is part of a potentially transformative study aimed at better understanding Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. A mother of 5 in her 70s, the woman was motivated because of her family history with dementia. She witnessed the struggle of her father in the years prior to his death. The woman wants to help UW-Madison researchers find effective treatments for dementia and perhaps even a cure, if not for her death, then for all future patients changed by the diagnosis. The university funds much of the research itself, along with some assistance from private research foundations and other philanthropic sources. Still, without indirect funding from the federal government, it is easy to imagine how a research study falls apart quickly. Consider what could happen to the safe, efficient and productive experience for a study participant like the woman participant for the dementia study. There may not be staff available to schedule or shepherd her through her visit. The PET machines might break down due to a lack of maintenance. The digital brain scans and other sensitive health data could be lost, corrupted or stolen by a bad actor, and there may not be enough money to purchase and power the freezer storage needed to preserve the blood samples. The UW-Madison research enterprise would not collapse overnight from diminished NIH funding of indirect costs, but the small compounding effects and long-term consequences could be devastating. Potentially life-saving research would become slower and less ambitious, and the true cost would fall on those waiting for the next medical breakthrough, who would have to wait even longer.
Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. Saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies, which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. ROSEP view. The United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions. Yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM2.5, and PM2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut down and burn tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom. The Eco-Design Wood Stove and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. Rosette View Purple Air PM2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.